Lamar was about to leave when a man in a police uniform stopped him, accusing him of a robbery he didn't commit. But this wasn't a real cop. He was a fraud, hiding behind a badge. The description of the actual robber came over the radio, and the truth hit Lamar hard. He was being targeted. What happened next would shatter everything he knew about justice. But let's start from the beginning. Lamar Johnson, a black man in his mid-30s, stepped out of the diner after his late shift, his body aching from hours of constant work. It had been a long, exhausting night, and all he wanted was to get home and rest. He was walking to his car when he was suddenly stopped by a man in a police uniform, Officer Charles Mitchell. Lamar didn't recognize the name, but the uniform, with its crisp badge and dark navy color, seemed official enough. "Excuse me, sir," Mitchell said, his tone cold and demanding. "I need to ask you a few questions." Lamar paused, instinctively scanning the area. It was late, the streets empty save for a few stray cars. The tension in the air felt off, like something wasn't right. Mitchell wasted no time, accusing Lamar of robbing a nearby convenience store. Lamar blinked, thrown off by the sudden accusation. "What?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "I haven't done anything. I've been at work all night." Mitchell was unfazed, his expression hardening as he repeated the claim. Lamar matched the description of the suspect, he said. Lamar, growing more confused, shook his head. "I was working the whole time. I'm not even near that store," he insisted, frustration creeping into his voice. But Mitchell wasn't listening. He leaned in, his presence becoming more intimidating. He stepped closer, his hand hovering near his belt, like he was ready to escalate the situation. Lamar's gut twisted as he realized that this wasn't about the robbery at all. Mitchell wasn't interested in finding the truth. He was interested in something else. Lamar's mind raced. Why was this happening? Who was this man really? Something about Mitchell's behavior felt off. His aggressive stance, the way he kept shifting his weight, the fake air of authority. Lamar could tell this wasn't a legitimate cop. This man was a fraud. But what did he want? What was his game? Lamar felt a chill run down his spine as he began to understand that he was being used as a pawn in some twisted scheme. This wasn't just about a robbery. This was about something much more dangerous. As the tension between Lamar and Mitchell escalated, the night air seemed to thicken with every passing second. Lamar could feel his pulse quicken, his muscles tightening. He was caught in a suffocating grip of confusion and fear. But then, just as the weight of it all seemed unbearable, a voice broke through the stifling silence. A young woman, Stacy, appeared out of nowhere, crossing the street at a brisk pace. She had been watching from a distance, and as soon as she recognized Lamar, she rushed over, her face flushed with distress. "Wait! Stop!" Stacy called out, her voice shaking with urgency. She turned to Mitchell, her eyes pleading. "He's not the one. I saw him all night at the diner. He couldn't have done it." Lamar's heart skipped a beat. Relief washed over him for a moment. Stacy's words felt like a lifeline, like someone was finally seeing the truth. But Mitchell wasn't swayed. His eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on his radio, and his tone hardened. "I don't care what you think," Mitchell snapped. "He's the one. He matches the description, and that's enough for me." Lamar's stomach twisted. He could see the resolve in Mitchell's eyes. This wasn't about finding the real criminal. This wasn't about facts. It was about something much darker. It was about power. Lamar was nothing more than a convenient target, someone to pin the blame on. As if on cue, the radio crackled to life, breaking the charged silence. Mitchell's hand tightened on the device, the words from the dispatcher barely audible. "The suspect has been apprehended," the voice said. "Description doesn't match the man in question." Lamar's heart slammed in his chest. The blood drained from his face as the dispatcher read out the details of the real robber. His mouth went dry. The description didn't match him in the slightest. The man they had caught wasn't even close to Lamar's appearance. The truth hit Lamar like a hammer. He'd been right all along. This wasn't about a robbery. It was about something deeper, something far more dangerous. His body stiffened with a surge of anger. Mitchell's attempt to manipulate the situation, his lies, were now exposed. But Lamar knew this wasn't over. The fraud still stood before him, and it wasn't just justice at stake. It was his dignity. Mitchell stood there for a moment, as if trying to regain his footing. The initial shock of the radio's revelation had thrown him off, but the calm that followed was deceptive. His eyes narrowed, and instead of conceding defeat, he steeled himself. Without a hint of remorse, Mitchell leaned in closer to Lamar, his voice low but forceful. "You fit the profile," he insisted, a desperate edge in his tone. "That's all that matters." His hands clenched into fists, as if bracing for any confrontation. Lamar's chest tightened. It wasn't just the words that stung. It was the implication. Mitchell wasn't even attempting to hide his prejudice now. This wasn't about any crime that had been committed. It was about control, about taking Lamar and reducing him to nothing more than a stereotype, a target for someone who needed to feel powerful. Lamar could feel his blood boiling, a cold, sharp anger coiling in his gut. He thought of everything he had worked for, the years spent just trying to live his life without being reduced to some random criminal because of the color of his skin. It wasn't just an accusation. It was an assault on his identity, and it cut deeper than any physical blow. He could have walked away, tried to avoid further confrontation. But the moment Mitchell grabbed his arm, pulling him back with an unnecessary force, everything inside Lamar snapped. The touch, the presumption, the complete disregard for his rights. Something inside him ignited. He wrenched his arm free, stepping forward with icy calm. His eyes locked onto Mitchell's, and his voice came out steady, cold. "You won't get away with this," Lamar said, each word laced with certainty. "I know my rights." For a split second, he saw Mitchell falter. Something flickered in his eyes. Hesitation, uncertainty. It was brief, but it was enough. Lamar knew he had found the crack in Mitchell's armor, the vulnerability that came from fear. Fear of being exposed. Fear of losing control. The realization that the man standing before him was nothing more than a fraud, a coward hiding behind a stolen badge. Lamar's anger didn't subside, but his resolve strengthened. Whatever Mitchell tried next, Lamar wouldn't back down. He had the truth on his side, and that was more than enough. As the altercation escalated, a crowd gathered, some recording the scene. Someone called for backup, but by the time the real officers arrived, the damage had already been done. Lamar was humiliated, but he wasn't going to let Mitchell's fraud stand. The backup officers quickly assessed the situation, realizing that Mitchell had no business being there. They immediately took control, removing the fake cop from the scene and reprimanding him for his actions. Lamar walked away from the incident, a sense of victory stirring within him. Despite the fraud's attempt to intimidate him, the truth had come to light. Mitchell's fake badge and lies would no longer fool anyone. Lamar's courage in standing up for himself had made a difference, but the deeper issue, people like Mitchell abusing power for their own selfish gain, was still there. Lamar knew the fight against such injustice wasn't over, but he had taken one important step forward.